Ever wondered if SpongeBob is actually a genius or just completely clueless? We're diving into the yellow sponge's brain, his moments of surprising brilliance, his epic confusion, and what his real IQ might actually be. So buckle up, because SpongeBob's intelligence is way more complicated than you think. And stick around, because at the end of the video, we're revealing what SpongeBob's actual IQ might be, based on everything we've seen. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Help Wanted is SpongeBob's very first episode, and literally the foundation for judging his intelligence level. This pilot episode shows us a SpongeBob who desperately wants to work at the Krusty Krab, but faces an impossible task that should crush any normal person's dreams. This episode aired in 1999 and established everything we know about Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob has been dreaming about working at the Krusty Krab his entire life, training with stuffed animal weights and practicing his spatula skills. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs and Squidward see him as an annoying nuisance who couldn't possibly handle a real job. The setup is perfect for testing SpongeBob's actual capabilities under pressure. The tension builds when SpongeBob finally gets the courage to apply for the job. He's nervous, stumbling over his words, and literally trips over a nail and bounces around the restaurant like a pinball. This shows classic SpongeBob clumsiness. He's clearly not the smoothest guy around, but watch his conversation with Patrick outside the restaurant. When Patrick asks who made a spatula out of toothpicks in wood shop, SpongeBob remembers it was him. When asked whose first words were "May I take your order?" he knows that too. This shows decent memory and self-awareness, but nothing extraordinary. Mr. Krabs, thinking he's being clever, sends SpongeBob on what he believes is an impossible mission. Find a hydrodynamic spatula with port and starboard attachments and turbo drive. Both Krabs and Squidward laugh because they think this item doesn't exist and they'll never see SpongeBob again. Here's where SpongeBob shows a critical flaw in his thinking. He doesn't question the request at all. A smarter person might wonder if this equipment actually exists or if they're being pranked. While Krabs and Squidward are panicking about the anchovy invasion, SpongeBob actually finds the spatula at Bargain Mart. He's not a genius for this. The store literally had one in stock, but he does show basic problem-solving skills by going to the right place and asking for what he needs. The fact that he finds it while singing a little song about spatulas shows his childlike approach to tasks. He's focused, but not particularly strategic about it. Then comes the cooking scene, where SpongeBob feeds hundreds of hungry anchovies efficiently. He's clearly skilled at cooking, but let's be honest, this is his dream job that he's been preparing for his whole life. Of course he'd be good at it. The montage shows him chopping vegetables, grilling patties, and assembling burgers with impressive speed. But notice how mechanical his movements are. He's following learned patterns, not improvising or creating new techniques on the spot. What's really telling is how SpongeBob handles the crisis differently than Krabs and Squidward. While they're panicking and completely overwhelmed by the crowd, SpongeBob stays calm and methodical. This shows he can perform under pressure when it's something familiar to him. But this is just competent execution of skills he's already mastered. Mr. Krabs immediately recognizes SpongeBob's value and hires him on the spot. But here's what shows his limitations. When Patrick orders just one Krabby Patty, SpongeBob launches dozens of them at him. This perfectly demonstrates his average level thinking. He can handle complex situations when he's focused and prepared, but he struggles to adjust when the situation changes. His brain doesn't smoothly transition from mass production mode to single order mode. The episode also reveals SpongeBob's complete lack of social awareness. He doesn't pick up on the fact that Krabs and Squidward were trying to get rid of him with the impossible task. When they're laughing after he leaves, he's completely oblivious to their mockery. A more socially intelligent person would have sensed the setup immediately. Throughout the episode, SpongeBob shows the classic traits of someone with average intelligence who's highly motivated. He can learn specific skills really well, especially when they involve something he's passionate about. He can follow instructions and complete tasks when giving clear direction, but he struggles with reading between the lines, adapting to new situations, and understanding social dynamics. The real insight from Help Wanted is that SpongeBob represents the average person who can achieve good things through persistence and passion rather than raw intelligence. He's smart enough to be functional and capable in familiar situations, but lacks the flexible thinking needed for complex social navigation or abstract problem solving. This episode perfectly sets up his character as someone who succeeds through enthusiasm and preparation, not intellectual brilliance. While SpongeBob thrives in familiar situations like the Krusty Krab, his lack of practical skills and flexibility show up when he's tested in new, unpredictable scenarios like in boating school. Now, let's look at boating school, which perfectly demonstrates SpongeBob's intelligence limitations in a completely different way. This episode shows us a SpongeBob who knows everything about driving, in theory, but completely falls apart when it comes to practical application. SpongeBob has been taking driving lessons with Mrs. Puff, and this is his 38th attempt at the driving test. But here's what makes this episode so revealing about his intelligence. He actually knows all the rules perfectly. When Mrs. Puff starts asking him questions during the oral exam, SpongeBob rattles off every answer before she even finishes asking. He knows the bow, stern, starboard, port, and even obscure details like 1924, probably referring to some maritime regulation. SpongeBob has clearly studied hard and absorbed all the information. He can recite complex driving regulations without hesitation and understands the theoretical concepts perfectly. But the moment he gets behind the wheel for the actual test, everything goes wrong. Mrs. Puff asks him to start the boat, and he panics completely. When she asks what to do next, he blurts out, "Floor it," and when she says yes, then immediately says no. He misunderstands and floors it anyway, crashing into a lighthouse. What's really telling is SpongeBob's confidence level going into this test. He wakes up declaring, "I've never felt so capable," and rides his unicycle to school chanting, "I'm ready," over and over again. He throws away his unicycle, saying he won't need it anymore because he's so confident he'll pass. This kind of all-or-nothing thinking shows his inability to plan for multiple scenarios. A smarter person would keep backup transportation just in case, but SpongeBob's thinking is too rigid for that kind of contingency planning. What's fascinating is how his brain works during the test. You can see him trying to remember everything at once, but instead of helping him, the pressure overwhelms him completely. A smarter person would be able to prioritize and focus on the most important tasks, but SpongeBob gets paralyzed by having too much information in his head. He knows the answer is 1924 to some question, but he can't figure out which question that actually answers. The episode shows us someone with decent memory and learning ability who completely lacks practical application skills. He can memorize facts and repeat them back perfectly, but he can't translate that knowledge into real-world performance under pressure. This is classic average intelligence behavior, good enough to learn the material, but not flexible enough to adapt when stress hits. Patrick's involvement makes SpongeBob's intelligence level even clearer. When Patrick helps him through the walkie-talkie, SpongeBob follows the instructions perfectly at first. Patrick tells him to start the boat, put it in drive, use his big toe on the pedal, and SpongeBob executes everything flawlessly. The montage shows him actually acing the driving test with Patrick's guidance, stopping at signs, signaling properly, even helping other people cross the course. But here's the key part. SpongeBob doesn't question any of Patrick's instructions. He just follows orders without thinking critically about whether they make sense. This shows his biggest intellectual weakness. He doesn't use independent judgment or question authority. He's smart enough to follow directions, but not smart enough to evaluate whether those directions are appropriate. What's particularly interesting is how SpongeBob acts when Patrick tells him to act natural while Mrs. Puff approaches. SpongeBob immediately gets on all fours and starts mooing like a cow while eating grass. This shows his literal interpretation of instructions and complete lack of social intelligence. A smarter person would understand that act natural means act normal, but SpongeBob interprets it as act like a natural animal. The driving montage reveals another aspect of SpongeBob's intelligence. With Patrick's constant guidance, he actually becomes an excellent driver, stopping for pedestrians, signaling properly, even doing fancy maneuvers. This proves he has the physical coordination and basic cognitive ability to drive well. His problem is the inability to manage multiple tasks independently without constant support. Then comes Mrs. Puff's sarcastic comment about having a little radio in your head and some guy miles away giving you all the answers. She's being sarcastic, and both SpongeBob and Patrick laugh because they think it's funny. But the moment Mrs. Puff says, "But that that would be cheating. SpongeBob has an immediate panic attack. He doesn't gradually realize what's happening. He instantly understands he's been cheating and completely loses it. This reaction shows his black and white moral thinking. A smarter person might try to rationalize the situation or find a middle ground, but SpongeBob immediately jumps to full confession and panic mode. He starts crying hysterically, admits everything, and completely loses control of the boat while Mrs. Puff desperately tries to get him to focus on driving instead of his moral crisis. The crash happens because SpongeBob literally cannot handle the cognitive load of driving while having a moral breakdown. His brain just shuts down when faced with this ethical dilemma, proving he lacks the mental flexibility to handle complex situations where multiple things are happening at once. The irony is that Mrs. Puff actually tries to tell him it's okay to cheat that way, meaning steer the boat. But SpongeBob's brain is so locked into the moral panic that he can't process her driving instructions. The ending provides one final insight into SpongeBob's thinking patterns. After the crash, he apologizes to Mrs. Puff and promises to try harder next semester. This shows he still doesn't understand what went wrong. He thinks the solution is just more effort rather than a different approach, which demonstrates his inability to analyze and learn from his mistakes effectively. What makes boating school perfect for understanding SpongeBob's intelligence is how it separates knowledge from application and shows his moral rigidity. He proves he can learn and memorize information effectively, but he completely lacks the flexible thinking needed to adapt that knowledge to real situations or handle ethical complexity. He's smart enough to understand concepts, but not smart enough to perform under pressure or think independently when things get complicated. His success with Patrick's help proves he has the basic capability, but his complete breakdown when faced with an ethical dilemma shows the limitations of his cognitive flexibility. While SpongeBob struggles with practical tasks and pressure, his journey through others' dreams in sleepy time shows an even deeper lack of understanding and social awareness. Now let's examine Sleepy Time, which gives us the most revealing look into SpongeBob's actual intelligence by literally taking us inside everyone's minds. This episode shows us what SpongeBob thinks about himself and others when he's operating on a subconscious level, and the results are pretty telling about his mental capabilities. The episode starts with SpongeBob having a dream where he's driving a car and finally has his driver's license. But even in his own fantasy, he crashes, and Mrs. Puff appears to tear up his license, saying, "Not even in your dreams." This shows that deep down, SpongeBob knows he's not competent enough to drive, even in his subconscious ideal world. The real intelligence test begins when SpongeBob accidentally exits his own dream and discovers he can enter other people's dreams. When he finds Gary's dream, Gary immediately scolds him, saying, "How dare you invade the sanctity of my dreams?" But what's interesting is how SpongeBob reacts. He's amazed that Gary can talk and seems genuinely curious about the library setting. Gary quotes Emily Dickinson and tells sophisticated poems, showing he's much more intellectually advanced than SpongeBob realizes in waking life. SpongeBob's response to Gary's intelligence is pretty revealing. When Gary recites complex poetry, SpongeBob just says, "Gee, Gary, you sure are smart," like he's surprised by basic intellectual ability. This shows his limited understanding of intelligence. He can recognize it when he sees it, but he doesn't seem to grasp the deeper concepts Gary is discussing. When SpongeBob enters Patrick's dream, he finds Patrick riding a kiddie ride in a completely blank white space. SpongeBob tries to show Patrick that you can do anything in dreams by turning into a skyscraper and making copies of himself. But Patrick just responds with, "Yup," and seems completely satisfied with his simple ride. What's telling is that SpongeBob gets frustrated when Patrick doesn't appreciate his demonstrations. This shows SpongeBob's need for validation and his inability to understand that Patrick might be content with simplicity. The Squidward dream sequence really exposes SpongeBob's social intelligence limitations. Squidward is performing as Wolfgang Amadeus Tentacles for a king, living out his fantasy of being a respected classical musician. Instead of quietly observing or supporting Squidward's dream, SpongeBob immediately starts disrupting the performance by telling the king jokes. When Squidward breaks his clarinet in frustration, SpongeBob transforms into a replacement clarinet. But instead of helping Squidward sound good, he just sings loudly and off-key. The weird part is that the audience loves loves SpongeBob's horrible singing. This creates an accidental success, but it completely ruins Squidward's sophisticated musical fantasy. SpongeBob doesn't understand that Squidward wanted to be respected for his actual musical talent, not for novelty entertainment. This shows SpongeBob's inability to read deeper motivations. He sees a problem, broken clarinet, and tries to fix it, but he completely misses the point of what Squidward actually wanted. Sandy's dream reveals another layer of SpongeBob's thinking patterns. They're skydiving together, and Sandy explains they need a big old parachute to land safely. SpongeBob completely misunderstands her instructions, first thinking she means pair of shoes and then parakeet. While Sandy is trying to explain the difference, she fails to open her parachute in time and crashes into a truck of clam manure. SpongeBob's literal thinking and poor listening skills directly contribute to Sandy's crash. After Sandy's dream goes wrong, SpongeBob says, "All right, that's it. No more messing with people's dreams." This shows he recognizes he's causing problems, which suggests some self-awareness. But then, he immediately goes into Pearl's dream anyway, proving he can't actually control his curiosity, even when he knows it's problematic. Pearl's dream is an innocent tea party with stuffed animals, and SpongeBob quickly realizes it's not Mr. Krabs' dream. Pearl gets annoyed when SpongeBob dismisses her tea party to look for her dad, showing his lack of sensitivity to others' interests. He sees her girly fantasy as less important than finding Mr. Krabs' more robust dream. In Mr. Krabs' dream, SpongeBob shows better understanding of the situation. Mr. Krabs is trying to catch Moby Dollar, and SpongeBob actually helps effectively by getting the money net, which turns out to be Mr. Krabs' wallet. But when SpongeBob lets go of the wallet to shake hands, the money escapes, and Mr. Krabs literally fires him out of a cannon. This shows SpongeBob's tendency to get distracted by social pleasantries when he should be focusing on the task at hand. The plankton nightmare sequence shows SpongeBob's moral instincts kicking in when he sees giant plankton destroying the city and threatening Gary. SpongeBob immediately jumps into action to protect his pet. He turns into a thumbtack to deflate plankton, showing quick thinking under pressure. This is actually one of his smarter moments in the episode. He correctly identifies the threat and comes up with an effective solution. The ending provides the final insight into SpongeBob's intelligence. When he wakes up, everyone except Patrick is standing around his bed, angry about their ruined dreams. They all tell him to stay out of their dreams, and SpongeBob seems genuinely confused, asking if they're having a slumber party. This shows he still doesn't fully grasp the impact of his actions or understand why everyone is upset with him. Throughout Sleepy Time, SpongeBob demonstrates the classic traits of average intelligence. He can recognize problems and wants to help, but he lacks the sophisticated thinking needed to understand complex social dynamics or predict the consequences of his actions. He shows good intentions, but poor execution, empathy but limited emotional intelligence, and curiosity, but poor judgment about when to act on it. The episode proves that SpongeBob's problems are about being smart enough to want to help, but not smart enough to do it effectively. His pattern of good intentions leading to unintended consequences perfectly illustrates someone with average intelligence trying to navigate situations that require more nuanced thinking. While SpongeBob's dream adventures show his lack of understanding, Chocolate with Nuts highlights how easily he's tricked when chasing success. But Chocolate with Nuts shows us what happens when SpongeBob gets motivated by money and status, but the results reveal he's way more gullible than clever. This episode is fascinating because it shows SpongeBob can adapt and learn, but he's also incredibly easy to manipulate and lacks basic critical thinking skills. The whole thing starts when SpongeBob accidentally gets Squidward's fancy lifestyle magazine and becomes obsessed with getting rich. When Squidward explains that wealthy people are entrepreneurs who sell things, SpongeBob immediately decides he and Patrick should become traveling chocolate bar salesmen. The logic is simple enough. Buy chocolate, sell it for more money, get rich. It's not a bad plan on paper. But SpongeBob's first major intelligence failure happens almost immediately. When they approach their second house, the homeowner, who turns out to be a con artist, calls them mediocre salesmen and convinces them they need special candy bar bags. SpongeBob doesn't question this at all. He just accepts that some random stranger knows better than he does about his own business. A smarter person would wonder why this guy cares so much about helping competitors. What makes this even worse is that SpongeBob gets scammed by the exact same person twice in a row. The con artist literally sells them candy bar bag carrying bags at the very next house, and SpongeBob still doesn't recognize him. When When Patrick asks if he's the same guy, SpongeBob just accepts the man's denial without any follow-up questions. This shows seriously poor observational skills and memory. The pattern continues when they can't even complete a simple sale because SpongeBob can't find the chocolate bars among all his unnecessary bags. When the customer gets impatient and leaves, SpongeBob doesn't realize the bags are the problem. He just thinks they need a new approach. This shows he can identify when something isn't working, but he's terrible at diagnosing the actual cause. SpongeBob's attempts to improve their sales technique reveal both his limitations and his capacity to learn from feedback. When Patrick suggests, "Let's get naked," SpongeBob says they should save that for when we're selling real estate, which shows he understands different strategies work for different situations. But when they try being nice, SpongeBob completely misunderstands what that means, and Patrick ends up telling a customer, "I love you." The lying strategy starts when Patrick comes up with the idea to stretch the truth after seeing a misleading advertisement. SpongeBob immediately embraces this approach, but he's not the mastermind behind the specific lies. When they meet the extremely old woman, it's Patrick who invents the "rub chocolate on your skin to live forever" claim. SpongeBob just goes along with it, showing he can follow Patrick's lead, but doesn't come up with the creative deceptions himself. As their lying escalates, SpongeBob does show some ability to improvise claims like, "It'll make your hair grow," and "They'll make you sound smart." But these are just random benefits he's making up on the spot. There's no evidence he's reading customers and tailoring specific lies to their needs. He's just throwing out wild claims and seeing what works. The climax reveals SpongeBob's biggest intelligence failure. When they dress up as injured people to gain sympathy, they encounter someone who's supposedly in much worse condition than they are. Instead of recognizing this as suspicious or potentially fake, SpongeBob is immediately overcome with sympathy and buys all the man's chocolate with their profits. This shows genuine empathy, but terrible judgment. He doesn't question why this incredibly injured person is selling chocolate or whether the situation makes sense. The fact that the injured man is actually the same con artist who scammed them twice before makes SpongeBob's gullibility even more obvious. He's now been fooled 3 times by the same person, using different disguises and approaches. This is a pattern of poor critical thinking and inability to learn from experience. What's really telling is that SpongeBob never realizes they've been scammed, even after losing all their money to the fake injured man. He doesn't connect the dots or become suspicious of strangers offering deals. He just accepts their failure and prepares to give up, showing he doesn't understand what actually went wrong. Their ultimate success comes through pure luck, not intelligence. Tom, the chocolate-obsessed customer who's been chasing them all day, finally catches up and wants to buy all their remaining chocolate. SpongeBob and Patrick are terrified at first, but when Tom reveals he just wants to make a purchase, they're shocked rather than relieved. This shows they didn't plan for this outcome or recognize it as a business opportunity. The ending shows SpongeBob can enjoy success when it falls into his lap, but he still doesn't understand how business really works. They use their windfall to rent out an entire fancy restaurant, which is exactly the kind of flashy spending that wealthy people in the magazine probably avoid. SpongeBob mistakes spending money for being smart with money. Throughout Chocolate with Nuts, SpongeBob demonstrates classic markers of below-average intelligence when it comes to business and critical thinking. He's easily manipulated, fails to recognize patterns, doesn't learn from mistakes, and succeeds primarily through luck rather than skill. While he shows some ability to adapt and follow others' ideas, he lacks the analytical thinking needed to understand why things work or don't work. The episode proves that SpongeBob's enthusiasm and good intentions can't compensate for poor judgment and gullibility. When faced with unfamiliar situations like business dealings, his limitations become much more obvious than in his comfortable work environment at the Krusty Krab. While Chocolate with Nuts shows SpongeBob's gullibility, Band Geeks shows his strength in motivating others and working as a team. Now, finally, let's dive into Band Geeks, which gives us a really interesting look at SpongeBob's intelligence when he's working as part of a team and genuinely wants to help someone he cares about. This episode shows what happens when SpongeBob is motivated by friendship rather than personal gain, and the results reveal both his strengths and limitations in group situations. The episode starts when Squidward gets challenged by his rival Squilliam to perform at the Bubble Bowl with his band, except Squidward doesn't actually have a band. Instead of admitting this, Squidward lies and says he does, then frantically posts flyers around town looking for musicians. SpongeBob immediately volunteers when he sees the flyer, showing his willingness to help Squidward, even though he has no musical experience. What's telling about SpongeBob's intelligence is how he approaches this new challenge. He doesn't ask about payment, worry about whether he's qualified, or even question what instrument he'll play. He just shows up, ready to help, because Squidward needs him. This shows good social instincts and loyalty, but also reveals his tendency to jump into situations without thinking them through. The first practice session is a complete disaster, and SpongeBob is part of the problem. When Squidward asks if anyone has musical experience, SpongeBob doesn't raise his hand, showing he at least knows he's a beginner. But when Patrick asks, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" SpongeBob doesn't correct him or show any more musical knowledge than Patrick does. This suggests SpongeBob's understanding of music is pretty basic. During the practice attempts, SpongeBob shows he can follow simple instructions, but struggles with more complex coordination. When Squidward tries to teach them to play instruments, SpongeBob participates in the chaos, but doesn't stand out as being particularly better or worse than anyone else. When they practice marching, SpongeBob asks, "Is this the part where we start kicking?" confusing marching band formations with chorus line dancing. This shows his limited understanding of different performance types. The practices continue to be disasters over several days. SpongeBob participates in all of them, but there's no evidence he's learning faster than anyone else or showing special musical talent. When the flag twirlers crash into a blimp on day 2, SpongeBob just watches like everyone else. When Plankton exhausts himself trying to play a huge harmonica on day 3, SpongeBob doesn't offer helpful suggestions. He's present and willing, but not particularly insightful about how to improve their performance. The critical moment comes on day 4, when everything falls apart. Squidward suggests they play really loud to sound good, which backfires spectacularly and breaks all the windows. Then a huge fight breaks out between band members, with people using instruments as weapons. SpongeBob tries to intervene by saying, "No, people, let's be smart and bring it off," but his attempt at peacekeeping doesn't work. The fight continues until the clock hits 10 p.m. and everyone just stops because practice time is over. When Squidward gives his heartbroken speech about how they've crushed his dreams and tells everyone not to bother showing up, SpongeBob finally shows his real intelligence, emotional intelligence. After Squidward leaves, SpongeBob immediately recognizes that they've hurt someone who was depending on them. He doesn't get defensive or make excuses. He takes responsibility and motivates everyone else to do better. SpongeBob's speech to rally the band reveals both his strengths and limitations. He tries to give examples of times Squidward helped them, but his examples are terrible. He asks Evelyn who rescued her son from a fire, and she says, "A fireman." He asks Larry who revived him when his heart gave out, and Larry says, "Some guy in an ambulance." SpongeBob's logic is basically, if we pretend Squidward was a fireman or paramedic, maybe we can help him. This shows good intentions, but pretty flawed reasoning. However, SpongeBob's emotional appeal works. Even though his specific examples don't make sense, his underlying message about helping someone in need resonates with everyone. He gets the whole group to commit to trying again for Squidward's sake. This shows he understands what motivates people emotionally, even if his logical arguments are weak. The transformation that happens between this pep talk and the actual performance occurs off-screen. We don't see SpongeBob teaching anyone or developing complex musical arrangements. The transcript just shows that after his motivational speech, the band somehow becomes competent enough to perform Sweet Victory successfully at the Bubble Bowl. During the actual performance, SpongeBob serves as the lead singer, which suits his personality and abilities. Singing doesn't require the same technical precision as playing instruments, and SpongeBob has always been comfortable performing and being the center of attention. The fact that he can carry a tune and perform confidently in front of thousands of people shows he has some natural performance ability, but it's not necessarily sophisticated musical intelligence. What makes this episode revealing about SpongeBob's intelligence is that his success comes from motivation and teamwork rather than individual skill development. He doesn't become a musical genius or learn complex coordination techniques. Instead, he recognizes an emotional problem, Squidward's disappointment, motivates the group to care about solving it, and then contributes his natural enthusiasm and performance ability to the final result. Band Geeks shows that SpongeBob's intelligence works best in collaborative, emotionally driven situations, where his enthusiasm and loyalty can compensate for his technical limitations. He's smart enough to recognize when someone needs help and inspire others to help too. But he's not smart enough to solve complex technical problems or develop sophisticated skills quickly. His success depends on being part of a team where his emotional intelligence can make up for his analytical limitations. After looking at all these episodes, SpongeBob clearly has an IQ of around 95. This puts him right at average intelligence, and it explains everything about how he acts. The thing about having a 95 IQ is that you're not consistently smart or dumb. You swing back and forth depending on what's happening. Some days you nail it, other days you completely mess up. That's SpongeBob in a nutshell. People at this intelligence level do great when they really care about something and have a clear plan to follow. But throw them into unfamiliar territory or ask them to think through complicated problems, and they struggle. SpongeBob can flip burgers like a pro because he's done it a million times and loves his job. But driving a boat, that requires quick thinking and handling multiple things at once, which is way harder for him. Why not hire? If SpongeBob was actually above average smart, he would have figured out the chocolate scam immediately and wouldn't need Patrick's help to pass his driving test. He'd recognize patterns better and wouldn't keep making the same social mistakes. Smart people learn from experience faster and don't get manipulated as easily. Why not lower? If SpongeBob had below average intelligence, he wouldn't be able to master complex cooking techniques, adapt his sales strategies, or give speeches that motivate entire groups of people. He also wouldn't be able to hold down a steady job or maintain genuine friendships. People with significantly lower IQs struggle with these basic life skills. The 95 sweet spot explains SpongeBob's weird mix of competence and cluelessness. He's just smart enough to function independently and excel in areas he cares about, but just limited enough to miss obvious red flags and overthink simple situations. This creates the perfect recipe for both success and comedy. At exactly 95, SpongeBob can learn new skills when he's motivated, understand basic social cues, and solve practical problems. But he struggles with abstract thinking, long-term planning, and recognizing when people are taking advantage of him. It's the intelligence level where you're capable but vulnerable, which makes for compelling storytelling. What's interesting is that this intelligence level actually protects SpongeBob's happiness. He's not smart enough to fully understand how messed up the world can be, so he stays optimistic. But he's not so limited that he can't appreciate complex emotions or form deep relationships. Having a 95 IQ makes SpongeBob the perfect main character. He's capable enough that we can respect him and want him to succeed, but limited enough that he needs help from friends and gets into funny situations. The number 95 captures SpongeBob perfectly. Smart enough to be functional and relatable, but not so smart that his struggles become unrealistic or his victories feel unearned. What do you think SpongeBob's IQ really is? Let me know your guess in the comments. And if you guys liked our video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.